Okay, so we are going to be doing Daf Kaf Het, but we're at the bottom of Kaf Zayin, and basically we are talking about definitions of food. So let me explain a little, and then we'll jump right in. There are different halachot. Something needs to be food. For eruv, right? Or you can only make a eruv with something that is food, that is edible. Also for maaser sheni, which is a tenth of your money. If you live far away and you redeem it for money, you go to Jerusalem, you can only use it to buy food. That's the second definition. Another one is tum'ah, something that becomes tameh. Food is more susceptible to tumah than other things. So each of those all have to be food, but there are slightly different definitions for each of those categories. What is included? Is it food for everyone? Is it food for animals? Is it something that is edible, even if it's not usually in, and so on and so forth. All right, so that's going to be the topic today. We're going to get into some detail of different kinds of plants and things, but we're starting off with maaser sheni, right? So this is food that you want to redeem. And basically, it all comes to one pasuk that's right here that says, "V'natata kesef bechol asher taveh nafshecha." You take the money that you used to when you sold your produce, because you live in Haifa, and you take the money to Jerusalem, and you can buy. And there's three phrases. Phrase number one says, "Anything you want," which sounds like, I don't know, anything you want. You can buy a car, you can buy a mango, you can buy anything, right? But then it specifies bakad, bason, bayain, bashechad, 4 items, right? Meat and intoxicating drink. And then the third phrase says, anything you want, and you eat it there in Jerusalem. So you can see how this can be a little bit confusing, right? What exactly does this mean? I don't know, in Peshat, I guess it's saying anything that you want to eat, but really emphasizing things that are expensive so that you should enjoy your holiday with meat and wine. But I don't think it's saying only those 4 items. But that's what the Midrash is going to struggle with and going to have 2 different definitions. All right, so let me tell you all the opinions first, so that it'll be clearer when we actually see it. There's Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish. He's the most lenient. He says, "Maaser sheni money, you cannot buy salt and water. That's not food according to anybody's opinion." But he says brine is okay, brine that the fish was in. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, not brine, but fish is okay. And then we're going to see 2 baraitot. They both say that fish is not good enough. That's not important enough as food. But one says that birds are okay, and one says, no, not even birds. It has to be animals. So that's the range of items that the range of opinions that we're going to see, those 4 opinions. Now, their machloket is going to revolve around how to interpret these pisukim when you have a general, and then a specific, and then a general, right? So this is subject to 2 different types of rules, and that's what we're going to see right now. So these 2 Tanaim and these other 2 baraitot that we're going to see, what is the essence, the root of their mahloket? Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, Rabbi Eliezer, darshe ribuye umeoteh, v'hani taneh darshe kelal uPerat. So these are 2 different systems. The first system is ribuy and mi'ut. This system is usually attributed to Rabbi Akiva that says any inclusive phrase or word comes to add in more things within that category, and mi'uteh, an exclusive word or phrase, comes to exclude them. This has a lot of malleability in figuring out like what should be included and not. And this is going to be the more lenient opinion in this case. The other system, which is attributed to Rabbi Ishmael, says Kelal uPerat, which means a generality and a particular. And in this case, a particular informs something about the generality. There's some definition about the particular example that tells us, in general, things that have to be more like that definition. So this one is a little bit more systematic in the results. So let's look at each one and see how it plays out. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, Rabbi Eliezer, dasher ribuye umeoteh. V'natata kesef bechol asher taveh nafshecha. That's the first phrase. Riba. That's an inclusive phrase. Bakar bason bashechad mi'et. Those are particular examples. That's a limiting phrase. Bechol asher tishal lecha nafshecha chazad v'riba. And then it has an inclusive phrase again. Riba umi'et v'riba. In that case, we include everything, anything that you want to buy. But we have to exclude something because there is a limitation phrase there. Let it be. So what are we going to exclude? That you cannot use your maaser sheni money to buy. Eliezer says you cannot use brine. You can fish is okay if there's fish in it. Eliezer ben Gadish mi'at mayim u'melach. Ben Gadish is the most lenient opinion, and he says the only thing that's excluded by the limitation phrase is water and salt. Everything else is okay. Okay, so that's the one system, and now we're going to look at the other system, which is more stringent. They follow that system. We have a general phrase, and then a particular phrase. And then again, a general phrase. Kelal, uPerat, uKelal. Whenever we have something like that, we have to find items that are similar to the example. Not only those four examples, but things that have something in common with them. In this case, what's in common? Has to be something that reproduces fruit from fruit, and it has to be something that gets nourishment from the ground. Now, actually, in those four examples, we have wine, which, that's a fruit and grows from the ground. Animals don't exactly grow from the ground, but they do eat from the ground. So they gain their nourishment from the ground. And so those are included, and anything that fits that definition will also be included. So you see where we're going here. Fish, birds, right? They don't really live on the ground. That's what we're going to discuss. There's a second version of that baraita that adds yet a further limitation. It has to be something that is an offspring of the earth. In other words, it has to actually come from the earth, be born of the earth. And you're going to ask animals or not, don't grow out of the ground. But all the way in the beginning in Bereshit, they are created from earth. And so we'll see that that's what it's talking about. Okay, so now we have these two baraitot. What's the difference between them? My benaihu. The second one is more limiting because it needs the velad, right? The difference between them is fish. We're going to reject this, so just hold on before we do. According to the first baraita, they grow from the ground. Now we're going to wonder about this. Do fish really grow from the ground? Not really. Maybe they eat little fish, and the little fish eat seaweed and something. In other words, eventually, all life is dependent on things that grow from the ground. But if you want to be something that was created from earth, that's fish were not. Fish were created out of water. And so, according to the second baraita, fish would not be excluded. That's Abaye's interpretation. But we're going to reject the question this. We're going to prove that fish cannot be considered growing from the ground from the laws of eating non-kosher, creepy, crawly things. In general, there's two basic prohibitions. And then depending on where it is, there are additional prohibitions. So something that putita, this is a water insect, you get 4 lashes, 2 of the regular ones and 2 extra ones because it's in the water. An ant walks on the ground, you get the 2 basic ones plus 3 other ones for creepy crawlies on the ground. A hornet is 6, 2 plus 4 because there's an extra one for things that fly. If you think that fish are considered growing from the ground, then you should add, besides the 4, you should treat it like an ant that grows from the ground. And you didn't do that. So you see, Abaye said all that. Therefore, you see, Abaye does not really think that fish are considered growing from the ground. So therefore, we reject that. And according to both of these baraitot, fish cannot be used. You cannot be used with to buy. You cannot buy fish with maaser sheni money. Ela maravina ofot ika benaihu. So the difference between these two baraitot is buying birds. If it's something that reproduces and is dependent on things that grow on the ground, That's birds. But it has to be created from the ground. That does not apply to birds, because birds back in the beginning of creation are made from mud, which is a mixture of earth and water, and not simply earth. This is based on a different midrash, because there's different pesukim in Bereshit Perek Aleph and Bereshit Perek Bet, and so when we combine those two pesukim, we get that they were created from mud. And so according to the first baraita, birds can be bought, and you can eat birds in Jerusalem. According to the second baraita, not birds, it has to be only animal meat. All right, good. Let's explain this a little further. Kelal nasa kelal musaf dafka perat uklal nasa kelal musaf al haperat v'yitzrabu lehu kol mileh. Okay, so what we're doing is these are all following kelal uPerat uKelal, which we can see as three phrases. But actually, it's saying that you should break those three phrases down into 2 plus 1. If you look at the earlier list of midot she'atzon nidreshet bahem, we know that Bishmael has 13. Hillel before that had 7. And then that older list is kelal uPerat and perat uKelal. Also, the Bishmael has them. And so what this is saying is kelal uPerat uKelal is made up of 2 of those. But which ones do you put together first, and then which ones do you add on after? So the one who says you should include birds, he's reading it as follows: kelal perat uKelal. Whenever you have perat uKelal, you always go by the second term. Whenever you have 2 terms only, you go by the second term. I'll give you an example. If I say, can you get me some orange juice, something to drink? Then what I really mean is I want anything to drink, right? Because that's what I ended off on. However, if I say, get me something to drink, orange juice, then I really want orange juice, right? I just started with something general, but then I specified exactly what I want. So that's the rule. We always go by the second term. So perat uKelal then means everything. Nasa kelal musaf ala perat. And so therefore I include everything. But then I take those second 2 words and I add on a kelal in the beginning. And so then the first kelal comes to limit it a little bit. It limits anything that is not similar in 2 ways, right? It has to be similar in at least 2 ways, which birds are, because birds do reproduce and they do get their nourishment from the ground, so they're okay. However, the other opinion, the second baraita, that excludes birds, kasavar kelala kamad dafka kelal uPerat. He takes the first 2 terms, kelal uPerat, then kelal elama shebeprat. And when you have kelal uPerat, then you follow only what's the particular, right? Particular only, which means only those items. Those 4 items, yes, nothing else. And then you have a second kelal that comes after. But in this case, I have only those 4 things. I'm only adding a little bit. So I'm adding less. What am I adding? Only something that is similar in 3 ways. In other words, something that is reproduces, gets nourishment from the ground, and was created from the ground. And birds don't have all 3. And that you see that when you do kelal uPerat first, then its definition is more limited. Okay, so this is actually a really fantastic source for understanding kelal uPerat uKelal. It's in the Baraita, that's in the Sidur, that people say every morning. And so this is good to know actually how it applies and how it works and the practical difference between them. All right.
So,
there aren't that many
on this note, where did they get the 3 and the 2 similarities from? Is that arbitrary? Is that based on something?
Yeah, so you have to find something that's they were mentioned in the Baraita, right? Those similarities. How do you know what thing to pick that's similar? That's based on you look at the common denominator between these items and and try to figure it out. So there is some amount of a reason that has to go into it. But it's more straightforward than the boy and miut, where you can really almost pick anything and say, oh, it's excluding this particular item.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
but you see, there is a machloket, so it's not so clear exactly what it is. And the Talmud Yerushalmi has a different explanation of what these are.
They're saying that there are 3 similarities on the list, and depending which way you read it, it's either all 3 or 1 less.
Right. If you say perat uKelal first, then you want to include more things. So then you only have to have two similarities. But if you say Perat uKelal uPerat first, then it's more limiting. And so more limiting means you need three similarities. So the second beraita adds another requirement.
No, my question is just where they get the numbers 2 and 3. Like, why isn't one similarity enough? Why isn't?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. But I mean, it's good. It's a good question. We can look at the other examples, but there aren't too many. But I think, well, maybe there's 4 examples, and some of them are animals, and some of them are fruits or grapes, right? So maybe that's why you want to see something similar to each of those. It has to be similar to both animals and fruits in some way. Maybe that's where we get the 2, and then the 3 is something adding to that. Okay, good. Now, okay, so that we finished that, the Maaseh Sheni definition, and now we're going back to Eruv. Eruv has to be something that is edible, right? You have to have your meal out of something edible. And I was going to mention a number of vegetation types of vegetation that, excuse me, that are good or not. Okay, this statement of Rav is going to keep us through the end of the next daf. We're going to analyze most of the items on this list. Eruvin befa'apuin ubahalag logot ubagud gedaniyot, אבל לא בחזיז ולא בכנפיות. So you can make an eruv with these items that are unimportant. They're edible, they're eaten, but they're not very important. They're cheap items. So cress, purslane, and sweet clover. These things, they are edible. People do eat them, even though not so much. So it's okay. But you cannot use green grain. That means like you have a grain, the green parts that are on the sides of wheat or other grain. So this is like usually things that you just throw out or you give to animals. This is not generally human food. Also, unripe dates, they're not edible. You can't eat them, so therefore you cannot make an eruv with those 2, chaziz and kanfiyot. All right, well, we're going to analyze most of them. We're going to start with this third item, the gud ganiyot. Ubagud gedaniyot mi me'arvin. Hold on, Rav, you just said that I can use the sweet clover. Is that true? Tanya gud gedaniyot merube banim yochelu, hasuche banim lo yochelu. Only if someone who has a lot of children should eat these, not someone who has few children, because eating this is bad for the reproductive system. And so, and if they ripen, then no one should eat them because they're just not, they're dangerous. They're not good for you. Hard to use as seeds. Right? So then you shouldn't use them at all. So according to this, they're really not edible. But why do you say you can make an eruv with them if they're dangerous to eat? So here's one answer. Maybe when Rav said you can use it for eruv, it's only when it was not ripened yet to eat its seeds inside, and it's talking about someone who already has many children, and so that person can eat it, and that's just fine. So he can use it for an eruv, but you're right, other people should not use it for an eruv. Or second answer, someone who doesn't have children can still use it as an eruv because even though he's not going to eat it, it is edible to someone else, and that's good enough. Our Mishnah said, the Nazir can put wine as his meal, even though he's prohibited from drinking the wine, but he'll share the meal with others, and they'll be happy that someone else will. It has to be edible to someone, not only to him. Also, Yisrael can use terumah, even though it's not edible to him, Kohen can eat it. So therefore, since someone who has a lot of children can eat this item, so to anyone can use it. Okay. Alma afagav de la hazir lahai hazir lahai achaname afagav de la hazir lahai hazir lahai. Even though this person can't eat it, someone else can eat it. It has to be edible to someone. So that's even a better answer. And the third answer, he was referring to the median clover, this type of sweet clover that is edible, right? The usual one, you're right, is not so edible, so don't use that one. But he was talking about this other kind. Okay, good. So that then we conclude that item. Now, one of the items that I've mentioned that one may not use is haziz, the grain, the green part of the grain stalks that was only used given to animals. So now we question that. Haziz lo, Rav Yuda Amarav. Keshut, Rav said also this opinion. Keshut behaziz. There you go. Keshut, we're going to get to more. Keshut is actually very interesting. It's a parasite plant. It doesn't have seeds. It attaches to a plant and digs into its root, digs into its stalk, and actually grows on top of a different plant. But we're going to get to that in a minute. But now we're talking about the haziz, the green grain. Says me'arvim bahem. You can use for an eruv, so they are edible. And you say a baracha on them. Those two things go together. If something that is grown for food, you say boreh pri adama. If something is not grown for food and you happen to eat it, then you would say shehakol. Okay, so here, see, according to Rav, haziz is fine. It is food. Lakashya, not a question. Before he came to Bavel, he thought that they were not edible. He came to Bavel, he saw people eat this green grain. And so he said, oh, I guess it is edible. And that's why he changed his mind. Okay, so that can resolve it. But we challenge that. Bavel Havyadu Bad Alma. Hold on, is Bavel the majority of the world? So what? So there's a few people in Bavel who eat this thing. That's not the usual custom of people in the world. We should go by the majority of everyone. And here we're going to prove it. Vatanya, haful vehaseora vehatiltan shezra'an liyarak batla dato etzel kol adam. Usually full, right? Beans and barley and fenugreek. These are things that people generally eat the inside, the grain of it. Now, if one person, some farmer says, I'm planting these for the green part of it, the shell, and not for the seeds and beans that are inside, that person is just crazy. And so his opinion is nullified, and we follow the majority. Therefore, the seed, you would have to, that's talking about maaser, yeah? You have to give maaser as food, and the green part, you don't have to give maaser because it's not food. And similarly, מתעשרין ירק וזרע, זרע לזרע מתעשרין זרע וירק. While we're mentioning the thing this Baraita, it talks about a couple of other things. Cress and arugula are eaten sometimes before they're ripe, sometimes after they're ripe, and you take the seeds out of them. So since they're eaten both ways, if you plant them, you have to give maaser both on the green part and on the seeds that are in them. So that's the second part. Anyway, for us, the first part is important that we see here. We go by the majority of people, not by the one person, or not even by a minority, this one community or one country that does it. And so this is not a good answer for the challenge of Rav. Rav, what's the deal? The green grain. Before you said it's not good, and here you said it is good. So we need another answer. Ikama Rav. Bidganunayata. He was talking about a garden variety of it, which is eaten. That's when he said you can use that for an eruv. And the first statement was talking about a type that is not usually eaten. And so that's where it is an easy resolution. All right, good. You just mentioned here zera gargir, right? Right here in this baraita. It was the second half of the baraita, but wasn't relevant to us. But now that you mentioned it, we want to talk about it more. Gargir, arugula. And so we said people eat it for both reasons, both the ripe, unripe part and the ripened part. So zera gargir l'maychazeh. Who would ever use the seeds of an arugula? All right, we don't see people usually eating that. Amar Rabbi Yochanan sheken rishonim shelo haya lahen pilpilin. All early generations, they didn't have pepper. They would crush this and they would dip their meat in it. And so you see that they were eaten back then. So we still consider them food, and you have to get maaser on it. Okay, good. We had this little snippet of the story back in Masechet Berachot. So here it is again. When he needed a break from his study, he would go and sit at the entrance of the yeshiva, And he would say, when the sages go in and out, I'll stand up for them, and that way I'll get a mitzvah. So my head is too, I need my head has to rest. I don't want to waste time altogether, so let me show honor to the sages as they go in and out. So he's sitting outside of the Bet Midrash, and then a child came out, a student. He didn't stand up for him, but he had opportunity to learn something. So he says, what did your rabbi teach you today? So they're doing a bracha bi. And so he's this keshut, that's the daughter. This is the item that doesn't have roots in the ground, but rather is a parasite plant. Amazing. I didn't know there was such a thing. So you learn a lot of things in Daf Yomi. Right, so this thing, he said, this parasite plant is still say boreh pri adama, which is strange. Haziz, which is the green parts of the grain, you say shakol ni'amid baro. So the rabbi answered, Amar le adraba ipecha mistabera hai me'al'a kamirbe hai me'avira kamirbe. It should be the opposite. The first one, the green grain, grows from the ground, so that should be adama. Whereas the daughter, the parasite plant, that grows from the air, and so that should be shakol. That was his challenge. But now we say, Halacha follows that child. The child didn't make it up. He's repeating what his rabbi said. Why? Because the daughter plant is fully ripened. So that's its full bloom, and so it's a pity. And the other one, the green part of the wheat, of the grain, is not complete. So you don't say adama on things that are not right. And the other challenge that you said that doesn't grow from the ground, here's a picture of it, of this parasite. And actually it does get its nourishment from the ground. And the proof is, if you cut the plant right from the root, then the daughter will die also. So even though it's not directly into the ground, it does stick itself into the root of the other plant that it's feeding off of, and so therefore indirectly it does grow from the ground, and so therefore you can say okay, that's super interesting. All right, now ובכן ובחפניות אין מערבין. All right, now all the way back at our statement, he talked about unripe grapes, unripe dates, and he said you can't use those; they're not edible. So is that true that you cannot use those for eruv? Behatanya kol nikach bechesef maaser ve'en mitame tumat ochalim. Vechanfiyot nikachot bechesef maaser umitameot tumat ochalin. This mentions two items, and we're going to talk about both. Kod is hearts of palm. This is the inside of a palm. Generally, they were not eaten in the olden days. I know now you buy them in cans and you put them in your salad, right? But in those days, they would wait for it to get hard and become, a stalk, become wood. But so if you do eat them, you can you can use your maaser sheni money to buy them. So they are considered food for maaser sheni, but they are not considered food regarding tumat ochalin, right? As we said, food was more liable to certain kinds of tumah, so it's not considered food for that purpose. However, these chanfiyot, unripe dates, they are food for the definition of maaser sheni, and they are also food for the definition of tumah, and therefore it should be also food regarding eruv. So why do you say, Rav, that you can't use unripe dates when this baraita says that unripe dates are food? Okay, that's going to be the question. We quoted a baraita, so we're going to finish quoting the entire baraita. And the second half is Yehuda's opinion, who says, the heart of palm is, in fact, like a tree for all matters. In other words, it's not food. Except for its definition for maaser sheni, that you can use it. This actually ends up being the same as the first opinion that also says you can buy maaser sheni, but it's not tameh. So it doesn't look like he's even arguing, because they say the same thing. The Gemara is going to ask that. in a few lines. So just remember that that's here. Okay, now the thing that we want to get to, the unripe dates, that is like a fruit for all things, except that you don't have to take maaser from them. So he agrees that you can buy these unripe dates with maaser sheni money. If you grow them, you don't have to give maaser though. Actually, so if you don't have to give maaser, then you wouldn't have to redeem them. Okay, so in this case, in that part, he does argue. Okay, we're going to get back to the biuda, but for our purposes, right, let's get back on track. Rav beforehand said unripe dates are not food, and you cannot use them for an eruv. And here, this baraita says they are food for other definitions, and so they should be okay for making an eruv. The answer is atam bid sin hane. There, that baraita that says they're okay are talking about fruits, these certain types of dates that never ripen. And so therefore, the unripe state is their full state. And so that's why they're food. Whereas Rav was talking about regular dates that you pluck too early, and so they are unedible because they're in an unripe state. And so those are not considered edible because they didn't reach their full maturity. Oh, so they're talking about different types of dates. We reject this. That can't be because the Biuda regarding that said, over here, that you don't have to give maaser. You don't have to give a tenth. And he couldn't have said that about these dates that never ripened, because we have a baraita about a similar case. Page means unripe dates of this place. And so he says, see, these unripe dates, you do have to give, you have to separate maaser. And so therefore, if it's talking about unripe dates, then you should have to give maaser. And he says you don't have to. So therefore, we reject that answer. Now we need a new answer. How come Rav originally said unripe dates are not edible, and here in this baraita says they are edible? So it's not talking about those unripe dates, those unripeable dates. Okay, regarding tum'ah, right? Tum'ah has a different law than different definition than other places. Regarding tum'ah, if something can be made edible by cooking, then it can receive tum'ah, right? Whereas for the other definitions, for an eruv, right, if something is right now not edible, then it cannot be used for an eruv. Even if it possibly could put it in the oven and then make it edible later. And so therefore, that's the difference. This baraita here was talking about maaser, and that's the item that is still food because it can be cooked and not otherwise. Okay, so that solves the problem. Now, this was Rabbi Yochanan's statement regarding if you can cook something later, then it will be chayav and it will become tumah. We want to find the source for that. Where did he say that? Aha, Titanya, shikedim hamarim, ketanim chayavim, gedolim peturim. Metukim, gedolim chayavim, ketanim peturim. If I have bitter almonds, when they're small, like young, then chayavin, I have to give maaser because I can still eat them when they're young, even though they're bitter. But gedolim, once they get bigger, they're really very bitter, and you can't eat them, and therefore you do not have to give maaser. If they're sweet almonds, then when they're big and ripe, those are chayavin. Or when they're small and unripe, nobody eats it like that, and so those are peturim. So it's opposite depending on each case. He says the bitter almonds, both big and small, you don't have to give maaser. Nobody eats them, not even when they're small. There's another opinion says when the bitter almonds in both states are chayav, you have to give maaser. Some people do eat them; they can be eaten. And so halacha l'maaseh, Rabbi Chanina, and when he was in Sipori, said that both of them you don't have to give maaser. Okay. So that's the statement. But now here we get to Rabbi Yochanan. According to the one who says that you do have to give maaser for both of them, what are they good for? How can you eat them? So there he said, because you could put them, you could cook them, and then make them sweet. Therefore, you have to give maaseh. So even though right now you didn't cook them yet, but since they could be cooked in the future, you have to give maaseh. So it seems that regarding the definition of food for maaseh and becoming tameh, if they can be made better by cooking, then they call it food even now. Whereas regarding eruv has to be something that I can eat right now on Shabbat when I make the eruv. And if I didn't cook it yet, it's not food. Okay, so that's how we resolve that question. Now, back to that baraita that I quoted had Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, and I said we're going to get to this in a few lines. Here it is. Amar Mor, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol harehu ka'etz l'chol devarav, ela shenikach b'chesed ma'aser, hainu Tanakama. So regarding the hearts of palm, Rabbi Yehuda says that they are considered like trees. In other words, they're not food, except for that you can use ma'aser sheni money to buy them. That's exactly what Tanakama said. Rabbi Yehuda is just saying it in a more generality. He's saying they are like a tree for everything. So he's saying it in a stronger language. So Abaye says there is a small difference between them. If you boiled or fried them, then according to Yehuda, he's more limiting, and he says no, it does not become tameh. Or Tanakama, then it does. That's one possibility. Would anybody say that's not food when you boil and fry them? Then look, it's very edible. Everybody would want to eat that. Look at the extent of how cooking helps. If you have skin of the animal, that nobody eats that, or the placenta, which generally people don't eat. And they do not become tameh. However, if you did cook it, or if you had in mind, so I'm going to eat that, then they do receive tum'ah. So you see that cooking helps something become food regarding tum'ah. So all the more so for hearts of palm, which are not as strange to eat as a placenta and skin. So we forget that answer. Ela amarava ika benayu berachad itmar kod. So those two Tanaim, the Tanakama and Yehuda, they can be arguing on the same thing that these two Amoraim are arguing on. What beracha do you say on hearts of palm? Yehuda would say Borei Pri Adama, and that would be Tanakama also, considering them like food that you grew for that purpose. Ushmael Amar Shakol Niyamid Baro, that would fit the Yehuda, who says it's like a tree for all matters. So which matter? Including shakol. Since it's not grown for food, if you happen to eat it, you only say shakol. Let's see why. Rav Yehuda Amar Borei Pi Adama Uchlahu. It's food. That's why I said Borei Pi Adama. Shmuel Amar Shakol Baro. Kevan Shesofo Lakshot. Lame Barchin Elave Borei Pi Adama. Although now it's edible, since most of the time people wait till it gets hard and treat it as a tree. Therefore, you cannot say Borei Pri Adama. Okay, good. Now, next topic. Amar le Shemuel le Rav Yehuda. Oh, not next topic. Same topic. Shemuel. This is a machloket between Rav Yehuda and Shemuel. And here's a case where Shemuel said shakol, but he likes to help his colleague out. And so Shemuel tells Rav Yehuda, Shinena kevatich mistabera. He said, you sharp one. I have a way of proving that you are correct. A radish, if you leave it, it will harden, and yet we still say Borei Pri Adama. So you see, I think you're right that we should say Borei Pri Adama, even though I just said the opposite. But the Gemara rejects this. Velohi senon nat'ai inashed adata tipulga tikla la nit'ai nashed adata dekora. It's not the same because people plant radishes with the intention of eating it while it's soft. And so therefore, that should be adama, even though if you would wait, but people don't like to wait, they eat it when it's soft. However, hearts of palm are planted with the intention not of eating them, but of waiting till they're hard so they can use them as wood. And so therefore, it's not the same. And even though Shemuel offered a support for his colleague, still, we don't accept his support. Rather, we follow Shemuel's own opinion. And so that is the halacha. Okay, good. Now, Gufa, Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, Keshut v'chaziz me'arvin bahen, u'barachin alehem borei pri ha'adama. So now we're going back to a previous statement that we said in the name of Rav. Beforehand, we used this as a question, a challenge to Rav's first statement, but now we're analyzing it in of itself. You said that the dodder and the green grain you can use as neruv, and you say borei pri adama. Now we're questioning. We know that you're allowed to use it. Question is how much, right? Generally, an eruv has to be enough food for 2 meals. But how do we measure that precisely when it comes to each item? So kishut bekama, the kadama Rav Yechiel, kimlo hayad, a handful. Achaname kimlo hayad, so that's the answer, handful. Haziz bechama, how about the green grain? When the farmers bundle it up together, they have a standard size of a bundle. That's the size that would be okay for an eruv. He says you can use this glass wort. Here's what it looks like. Here's a picture. Bekalya sakadatech ela biarkade kalya. Which is what you mean, glasswort? Nobody eats that. Rather, it means the herb that we use in order to prepare the glasswort. That's what it's talking about. We burn it and then we prepare it. That's what we're talking about. Chama, also a handful. Okay. Rabbi Yirmiyah, okay, we're almost done here. Rabbi Yirmiyah nefak lekiryata. One time Rabbi Yirmiyah went out to the village, to some villages. And I asked him in the village, how about soft beans? Right? Usually you wait till beans are hard, but soft, usually people don't eat it like that. But how about that? Can you consider that food enough to make an eruv? He didn't know the answer. So he came to Ben Midrash and he brought up the topic. And they said, yes, it's okay, you can use that. How much? A handful. He also said you can use raw beets. Those are usually you don't eat them raw, but yeah, it's okay, you can use them that way. Hold on, is that true? If you have raw beets, it will kill a healthy person. This makes a play on chaya. Chai can mean both raw and living. So therefore, you see, raw beets are very dangerous to eat. Nobody would eat them. So why'd you say that you can use them for an eruv? We answer, it's only dangerous when it's half cooked. As long as it's raw, it's okay, or fully cooked is also okay. Okay, we have another version of that statement, opposite. He says you cannot make a eruv with raw beets. Why? Because he said it can kill you, so therefore don't use it. Hold on, we see people eating beets all the time, and they don't die. It's only dangerous when it's somewhat cooked, right? But if it's not cooked at all, you're right, then it's okay. Or fully cooked. And that's what we're going to end with. Amar Rav Chisda, Tabshil shel tiradin, yafeh lelev, v'tov la'einayim, v'kol sheken libnei me'ayim. He has a little poem here, right, to remember this health tip, that cooked beets is good for the heart and good for the eyes, and also, all the more so, good for the intestines. It doesn't rhyme in English, unfortunately. It's only good for you if you sit at the stove, sit on the stove, and he says, and wait till it makes a sound, tuch tuch. In other words, it's boiling a lot, then you know it's fully cooked, and then it's that one is very good for you. But before that, be careful, that could be very dangerous. And so with that health tip in mind, we conclude. Baruch Adonai Le'olam.